So in this very focused section, we are going to look at assert all. So let's jump into the code. So assert all is really here to help us when we have a single test with multiple assertions. What this means is that when you exercise a piece of code, it may be that you don't want to just check one thing. You want to check maybe 3 or 4 parameters that are having the value that you expect, and the output is something else, something else that you expect. So there's multiple things that you want to check that all of these things are as you expect before you proceed. So before JUnit 5, in JUnit 4, you had a test with multiple assertions. If any of those assertions failed, the rest of the assertions were not even checked, okay? So you had to fix one problem at a time. So if all 4 assertions, for argument's sake, or 4 or 5 assertions were failing, you'd fix one, only then to discover that the next one isn't working, only then to discover that the next one isn't working. So let's see an example of this problem. Okay, but this is JUnit 5, by the way, but we can still demonstrate the same problem. So you see here that this assertion failed. Now the assertion is designed to fail. It says assert true equals true. Now that's fine, that's true. The second one says assert true, but it's got false. So that's obviously going to fail because it's expecting true, but it gets a false. And these two are then not checked. So if you look at the failures, you only get one failure, right? If I try to scroll down, I don't see any more information. So that's not particularly useful. In JUnit 5, we have something called assert all, which is in the assertions class. So if you look here, you can see that this is in the assertions class, the same place you're getting all the other assertions from. org.junit.jupyter.api.assertions.assertAll. And what this allows us to do is to provide lambdas with the assertions in them. And each one of these is executed regardless if any one of them fails and the errors are collated. So again, we've got 1 that should pass and 3 that should fail. And let's see what happens this time around. So this time around, if you compare to before where we only got 1 failure, we now get 1, 2, 3 failures as we expect. So if there's, for example, 10 assertions in a particular test and say 3 are failing and 7 are passing, you want to know which 3 are failing, right? You want to know the details. You don't want to just know that 1 failed. So that's what assert all allows us to do. So it's quite important to notice that these are lambdas, not just individual pieces of code, and they can be multi-line lambdas. So you can actually execute some code and then make an assertion here, and that would be treated as if it was one assertion, as it were. I hope that makes sense. So you can kind of think of this as a group of assertions. Now you may want to provide a heading for this group of assertions, like we've done here. So this is an overloaded version of this assert all method, okay? And we can pass it a heading. All right, so what happens when we pass it this heading? So let's run this test. All right, so this time around, we still get the assertion failures, which we want, and that's all good. But if we scroll down a little bit, we get some information saying heading ... 3 failures. So this is taken from this parameter here that's passed this argument that's passed to this assert all method. And if we had multiple groups, this kind of heading could be useful, so you know which particular group failed. All right, so another important thing to realize is that assert all is itself an assertion, okay, and it's on the assertions class. So let's take a look at this example here where we have an assert all, but there's only 1 lambda, okay, so it looks like we've got lots of stuff going on here, which we have, but there's only 1 lambda being passed to assert all, which means that it's pretty much pointless to use assert all here because there's only 1 lambda. Even though we've got multiple assertions going on under the hood, there's nothing to collate because there's only 1 top level assertion, which is this lambda here, okay? So for example, if we had this as 1 lambda and this as another lambda, maybe that would make slightly more sense. But in this case, it's all 1 lambda and therefore it doesn't really make much sense. Now, given that it's a multi-line lambda, and within that multi-line lambda, we've got an assert true with true, so that should pass. And we've got an assert all with some failing scenarios. So these are expecting true, but they're actually being given false. So what do you think will happen? Do you think all of these will execute? Do you think the errors will get collated or not? What will happen? So let's just run this and see what happens. All right, so that's now executed, and you can see that you get the 3 failure messages, and it says multiple failures, 3 failures. Okay, so it did the collation as we wanted. That collation happened because of this assert all. Now, the problem is that in the outer assert all, because everything is in 1 lambda, they're not separate lambdas, you won't get the collation at the top level. That means that this test, if it fails, we've got the same problem that we had before. The remaining tests will not execute. Okay, so let's run that to false and to prove this scenario. So let's just run that. All right, so as you can see now, we just got the 1 failure. You didn't get all the other ones underneath it. And that's because at the top level, there is only 1 lambda. So there's only, as far as it's concerned, there's only 1 thing to collate. these ones were only executed because before this we had this as true, so this one passed. The moment this one fails, you've got a problem again because these won't execute, okay? So this is not a good example of how to use assert all. Now if we scroll back to the top, this is a much better example because we've got each thing as a separate lambda. But one thing this example does show is that you can nest assert alls, and sometimes it may make sense, okay? You just have to structure it in the right way. So let's look at some more examples. All right, so you can kind of arbitrarily nest these things as you want. You could have an assert all with a lambda, with multiple lambdas. You could have assertions within that. Then you can have assert alls, and you can have all kinds of permutations of how you can nest all of this stuff. So we're going to look at a few examples here. Now, in this case, it's a little better because you've got these top level lambdas. You've got one there, another one there, and another one there, and another one here. Now, as we said earlier, assert all is an assertion, so you can just use it as you can other assertions. Now, this top level one here has got the same problem, okay, that we saw in the previous example, because the first thing you see is an assert true. Now, if this, for argument's sake, was to fail, then these would not execute, just like you saw in the previous example. So this inner bit here is not a very good example. This one is fine. This one is fine. These are just straight assertions. Now here we've got an assert all inside an assert all, which is a group of assertions. Now this kind of does make sense because you might want to test that this works and this group of things works, where if any one of them should fail, you still want the rest to run and you want to collate those results, and you are effectively grouping it here. So the important thing to realize is that there's lots and lots of permutations and configurations, and to do it in the way that makes sense for your project, and it allows you to kind of neatly organize your related assertions. But I would stress that it's quite important to keep your test fairly simple, to sort of err on the side of simplicity and don't make things unnecessarily complicated. So let's just run through this very briefly, a couple of points here. All the assertions at the top level assert all will be collated. And this is a multi-line lambda, so these won't be collated except for these, which are in an assert all. But if you pair it with this, it won't be collated because if this fails, this won't even be executed at all. Okay, these are fine. These are single line lambdas. And assert all can be used here as normal. As we said, it's an assertion, just like all the other assertions. It doesn't make great sense because it could just be part of the outer assert all, unless you want them grouped, which is what we're doing here. So we're just using it as a grouping mechanism. All right, so you don't need to remember all of these permutations, and there may be many other permutations of assertions as well. You just need to be aware that you've got lots of options, and you can kind of build up your assertions with assert all and all this kind of grouping and everything as it makes sense for your particular scenario. But like I said, I prefer to err on the side of simplicity and not make the tests kind of hideously nested or over nested or over complicated. All right, now we just got a few quick questions before we move on to make sure the understanding is good. And remember, after the questions, you can pause if you want a minute to think about the answers, and then we'll go through the answers. All right, question 1. Assert all will collate all assertions that appear underneath it. True or false? Assert all must specify a unique group for each group of assertions. True or false? All right, we're going to go on to the answers now. So question 1, assert all will collate all assertions that appear underneath it, true or false? The answer is false. If you had one multi-line lambda without an assert all inside it, you would not collate the failures in all of those assertions. It would just run the first one and then fail because it treats each lambda as an individual thing to collate. But if you've got other lambdas, they will execute, but inside one lambda, you don't get collation unless you also use assert all there. If that doesn't make sense, just rewind back and look at the previous example that we had, which is this guy and this guy. Okay, and question 2 was, assert all must specify a unique group for each group of assertions. No, we don't actually need to specify a group for each of the group of assertions. You can just use the non-overloaded method and not provide a group. So we've got a group here, but here there's no group, right? So we didn't specify a group here, and here we didn't specify a group, and here we did specify a group. So it's entirely up to you. You don't have to specify a group. It may be good practice if you've got lots of kind of nesting going on. And that pretty much concludes this section.